Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Sea+Summit podcast. This is the second video in our series on self-care, and I have my own personal counselor, Luke Vaughn of True Vine Counseling, who is he's the guy who I actually go to as part of my own self-care practices, and I meet with him once a month just to kind of check in on things and make sure everything's going well. And it's been a really positive experience for me. And today we are going to be talking about self-care in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, Luke, if you want to just kind of give us an idea about who you are, what you're about, and kind of what qualifies you to talk about this subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me on today, Stephen. Yeah, as you said, my name is Luke, and I am working towards my master's in counseling right now. I will graduate at the end of May. I do hold a certificate, though, from Light University. They're located out in Virginia. That allows me to counsel while I am working towards that master's degree. And from there, whenever I become licensed, you have to build up a bunch of hours, or once you graduate, you have to build up a bunch of hours to become licensed. So it's a process, but getting there. And so self-care is something that throughout my life, I have never done very, very good at. Was not well at practicing it, and getting into the counseling field has really shown me that this is necessary. It's necessary to take part in to survive. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it and kind of digging deeper into it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think when we're little, self-preservation is absolutely natural. And then we're kind of told, we overcorrect and say now it's just, self-sacrifice over and over again. And self-care is it's really kind of a balance of finding out, what you can give, taking care of yourself, but as well as taking on responsibilities for others around you.
Mm-hmm.
So what if you had to really define what self-care is to you, how would you define that?
Well, there's a bunch of definitions floating around for self-care, so you have to be careful which one you go with. For me, though, I think that self-care is, how do I refuel? How am I going to be a better person within my occupation, within my personal life, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of those realms? How am I best going to be used? And how am I going to best be filled within that? And so that is what self-care is to me, is taking that time to really figure out what that is and engaging in it and actively engaging within whatever it may be, so that I can, this sounds super cliche, but be the best version of myself.
Yeah,
in those areas.
That's really important. I know a lot of the people who listen to this, we're either business owners or we're working in really demanding fields, and I guess really it can apply to literally anyone. I think about my own wife, who's a stay-at-home mom, and if she doesn't get the ability to take care of herself because she's just constantly pouring out without that refueling, or then you will eventually reach the end of what you had to give. And then now, not only are you unhappy, with what's going on internally, you have nothing left to give to those that you really care about.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good point to hit on there. Self-care is something too that the world has deemed throughout the years, I think, as being weak if you practice it, especially within certain fields, within certain occupations. And so, it's also kind of deemed more for, the society has deemed it more for women to practice, when I think men, along with women, need it just as much. So good point there, man. That also I wanted to add something too, that self-care, along with the weakness that people kind of perceive when practicing it, a lot of Let me just give you a little background on myself. I am one of 9 siblings. I have 7 sisters and 1 brother, and all biological. And I can see my brother-in-laws and how much of an effect of not practicing self-care has on them, but not only them, their wife and their family. And so this is something that needs to be prioritized, because again, goes back to it being it helps you be a better version of yourself, better dad, better husband, better friend, better coworker.
Yeah. And I think it really does, it does come back to like, what do I have the capacity to give? It's about, yeah, for me, self-care is about constantly kind of creating those little gauges, like, being aware, am I a little too physically tired? Am I mentally tired? Am I spiritually tired? Am I relationally exhausted? Those kind of things. I was just talking with my wife, and she had to take a splinter out of my son's foot. And sorry, Freeman, if you ever come back and listen to these, he's a little dramatic. And it costs something just to be able to take that splinter out of his foot. It is going to suck every bit of the piece out of the room. And even just momentarily being able to step away. But for me, I've got almost like these little gauges. If I start to feel anxiety, if I start to think about this thing or that thing, for me, self-care starts at least with just recognizing where I'm currently at, where those gauges are. Is my love tank getting empty? Is my am I physically just tired? Because if I get physically tired, then those other tanks are also going to start depleting really quickly, and I won't have enough to give. And in the business world, in construction, or just we don't even have to be specific about it. Everybody has a capacity, and if we don't refuel in each and every one of those things, if we don't make space to refuel, then we will eventually be running on fumes, or we'll eventually shut down and reach a breaking point, which nobody wants that.
Right, absolutely. You bring up a really good point whenever you say that we all have these tanks, right? The problem here that I see a lot within my office is that people come in and they have no idea that these tanks are empty. And then whenever they figure out that these tanks are empty, they have no idea how to communicate to their spouse, to their partner, to their children, to their family and friends that these tanks are empty. They have no idea what to do next with that. And so it's not just saying, I need self-care. I need to take self-care. I need to practice this. There's so many things that fall below, the self-care umbrella that we really have to, that I really love helping my clients understand, because it is a big deal. It is a big deal to make sure that your tanks are full at all times.
Yeah.
To the best of your ability, not everybody can do amazing at it. I don't want to hold anybody to perfection. But I do want to hold somebody to actually trying, and I want to challenge people, and that's really what I love about counseling, and challenging my clients.
And that's really kind of what this series is about, is actually starting to give language and to start challenging people to actually commit yourself to learn how to speak those languages. One of the things that I do, I meet with a counselor with Luke here once a month, and I used to have and I'll give him a little shout out, Jeremiah, who's my old partner. He take self-care to the next level. His language for it, for me, before I started working with him, it was just this thing that women and children needed, and emotional language was completely out the door. And
Yeah.
but when I started working with him, it was just this really incredible experience of seeing how he took care of himself. And I realized that if I were to take care of myself in the same way, I could actually increase my capacity to accomplish the things that I really cared about, to fulfill my purpose, and to better take care of the people around me, as well as actually enjoy my life. So one of the things that I would, this is supposed to be a thought-provoking conversation
Right.
that will actually maybe cause some of you guys to understand that this is something you need in your life, and maybe commit yourself to learning the language of self-care, learning the emotional language, learning, how to take account of yourself and your capacities a little bit better.
Yeah.
This particular one, I want to jump right into it because I think it's one of the most important things. Relationships can be either the most life-giving or the most draining things in out of anything. And
Yes, sir.
so I want to really kind of jump in to the specific topic about self-care in our relationships.
Mhm.
And just kind of, what does that look like to you, Luke?
Yeah, so self-care within relationships, I think that, well, first off, I don't know if a lot of people know how to unpack that, right? They don't even understand how
Pretty
to
loaded.
unpack individual self-care. So how are you going to unpack self-care within relationships? And so whenever you break it down, self-care, what does it look like whenever you're dating, whenever you're engaged, whenever you're married, even whenever you're single, right? Um, I think a lot of people too have this mentality that they have to earn self-care. They have to be tired in order to partake within self-care. They have to put in 40, 60, 80 hours a week in order to uh, reward themselves with a
Mm,
couple hours of downtime. And whenever we have that mentality, who are we really hurting at the end of the day, at the end of the week? We're not hurting just ourselves. We're also hurting the people around us. Self-care is not something that we get to earn. It's like food, right? You need it in order to survive. Because again, who are you going to be helping if you do not partake within it? And so self-care within relationships, it has that same importance. If you don't know how to take care of yourself, how on earth are you going to take care of the person that you're dating, the person you're engaged to, the person you're married to? It has a huge domino trickle effect that will, it's not if, but will transcend down to the other people within your life. And so I think the first part is really realizing that this is a beneficial thing and it is not something that has to be earned.
mm, yeah. So to take kind of go down that rabbit trail a little bit more, I understand we could spend a long time talking about
Yeah.
self-care in relationships. Um, but let's to focusing in a little bit. Relationships, again, they can be draining or they can
Mhm.
be life-giving. Um, you know, how would you what would be some specific self-care tips?
Mhm.
Let's say we can start it with maybe just at the friendship level with your
Mhm.
relationships, but then also there's other relationships like with your boss and your work, your children, your family and extended family, things like that. What are some self-care tips, maybe such as like boundaries
Yeah.
uh, or kind of setting, I personally set mental boundaries so I don't necessarily have to set a physical boundary with people. And it's just one
Sure.
of the little things that I do. But what are some things that you would suggest in terms of practicing self-care with maybe those relationships that could be draining, and maybe focusing on those ones that
Mhm.
could be life-giving?
Yeah, I think that you brought up the most important part within that is boundaries. Knowing your boundaries, figuring out those boundaries. You're not rude for putting those boundaries in place, and it's not wrong for you to put those in place. Make sure that they are realistic, though, and that you're not closing your own self in whenever you place those boundaries. So this kind of can go for all stages of relationships, but I think the largest one other than boundaries is communication. Communicating how you feel, what's going on in your life, what you're needing, right? I might communicate to my wife that I need, an hour break. I might communicate to my wife, hey, I want to do this on Saturday. Does that always happen? Absolutely not. But it definitely is not going to happen if I do not communicate it. And so communicating with her about my intentions so that she's not assuming and I'm not putting expectations upon her that she's not unable, that she is not willing and able to meet. Okay, so I would say that that's the first part there. And then also realizing that whenever you are setting up these boundaries, whenever you're communicating, also know that there's just times that it's not going to work out, and that's okay. It's totally okay. And then again, I think being communicative within that as well. But other than that, the steps that I think that need to be taken is really just figure out how you refuel best. All right. For me, I love to garden. I love to be outside, love to do yard work, just working within the earth, if you want to call it, that's really fulfilling to me. If you don't know what is fulfilling yet, take a couple hours and just really hone in on, hey, what am I fulfilled by? Is that going to the movies? Is that kind of, they call it real therapy, REEL therapy? Is that watching a movie with my family? Is that watching a movie by myself? Is that going to the movies with my friends, to where I don't have to really communicate with them, but I can be present with them? Does that make sense? Self-care within that, self-care of, hey, I really want to hang out with you today, but I only can do it until this time, right? That way you're setting up expectations for them and they're able to meet those expectations. And then at the end of the day, no one is hurt, right? Those are just a couple things there whenever it comes to self-care. I think the largest thing, though, that people forget to do is that they can become really good at setting up boundaries, but then they do not realize the importance of communicating those boundaries and then communicating outside of those boundaries as well.
Yeah. We do a lot in contracting, which is literally just, we write out contracts for these things that we agree on, but it's just written communication. We're explaining boundaries of what we will, what we won't do. We're explaining our capacities and our intentions in those things. And, we talk about it's just as true. It's probably more true because, to be honest, a contract is literally just explaining the relationship of business at that point. It's just to explain and protect a relationship. And I would say, I really love that you brought up communication here, because it's one of those things that if you don't commit yourself to learning how to communicate your expectations, a lot of people, they don't even have language to fully communicate how they actually feel. They just know they feel something. And learning emotional language, or learning, beginning to learn language that can describe your capacities. If you don't have the ability to do that, you can assume that people will cross those boundary lines. You can assume that if you don't communicate, just in the contracting world, if we try and kindergarten proof everything,
Right.
and it's, if I don't explain to my wife that I don't like it when she does this particular thing, well, then I can't actually hold her to it. And if I never just set the boundary, especially before I reach the end of my capacity with that thing, then I can assume she's just going to keep crossing that line and keep crossing that line until I fully communicate that.
And that's where a lot of, you see whenever people present in session, that's where a lot of things go wrong. Is that, if I'm seeing a couple, the guy might say, well, what's the point of me communicating, because she's not going to take whatever I say and think that it matters, and so he's beginning to shut down, she's beginning to over communicate, or she's beginning to pull things out of him. Or it could be vice versa, where she is just not communicating, and just what you're seeing is, you're seeing couples Self-care within couples, you are, the guy is reading her brain, trying to read her brain, and she is trying to read his.
Yeah.
And we just can't do that, right? You
Yeah.
can't do that. And we are expecting something beautifully to prosper out of this marriage, out of this relationship, out of our singleness whenever we're, around friends. And it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I would, in relationships of any type, um, I would say there's some that, there's disconnection in relationships and then there's connection. I
Mm,
would say those, and when we put boundaries up, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a wall.
mhm,
It's actually, it's almost like a guide wall at
mm,
that point that should be leading towards better connection and
mhm.
protecting us against disconnection. And a lot of times we think that, you know, I'll just deal with it. I'll just, they don't understand and I don't want to be vulnerable and explain it to them. So I'll just deal with it. And then what ends up happening each time we make that decision to either not set a boundary or to not express ourselves, because being vulnerable costs something. But you know what?
Absolutely.
What costs more is not being vulnerable and being pushed to that breaking point in a
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah. And you do see it a lot within these higher stress fields of work, lines of work where the individual becomes closed off because they're so used to dealing with it within that line of work, or uh, kind of seeing as a challenge and conquering it within that line of work. But whenever you bring that home,
Yeah.
your wife, your husband, your children, they are not your coworker or your boss, right? They're not something that needs to be challenged or um, something for you to overcome. It's more for you to be relational with them, and even practicing knowing what that is. I loved how you said that with boundaries. It's not really a wall. It's more just, hey, I'm setting up a no and I'm setting up a yes, and that's okay, you know. And so I'm setting up a no that I'm not going to do this at home, and I'm setting up a yes that, hey, this is okay within the professional field, but to a certain degree. You know,
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Yeah. Connection at the end of the day is really the goal. And that's kind of the guideline that I look for is
Hmm.
this boundary leading us towards connection, or is it actually a wall that's there for disconnection? Is it a bridge that I'm building or a wall?
Mm,
And and don't get me wrong, there's times when you have to put walls up. There,
right.
you have to, if there's a very unhealthy person who's in your life, someone you're working with, it just requires a lot from you and you just know that you don't have it to give, you may have to put up a very clear boundary, a very clear wall that says, today I cannot do this. Um, but then you prioritize setting some time aside to take care of yourself. And then when you maybe have a better capacity for it, is when you start really focusing on that bridge.
Yeah.
Uh, but you have to have a surplus sometimes to deal with some people.
You have to have a surplus, and you just have to have a knowledge of how this all works. And whenever you are hearing a podcast, which is great, don't get me wrong, or you're reading a self-help book or something like that, is that enough? And you have to really challenge yourself. Is that enough for me to take what I am learning and put it into place? So much of life is not learning, but rather unlearning our habits and
Yeah.
what we've really put into place. And so I want to challenge the listeners, but also just yourself, you and myself here, and kind of ask that question. Are we really taking what we know and putting it into place, or do we need to go to the next level of expertise, right? And gain from them, ask them to help us unlearn what we have learned within self-care, within other aspects of life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. Um, I want to ask you something specific here. Uh,
Mhm.
in a culture that just values high production, everybody is valued based off of what they can bring to the table, what they can produce. Um, we even kind of we, we look at relationships in that way based off of what can they give me, things like that. Someone who is expected to give, 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 such as a father or a
Hmm.
mother or a high, a high efficiency professional in the marketplace, how do they, what are some good tips and tricks on how to actually reserve some of their energy?
Hmm.
Like I have certain things in place that
Hmm.
I meet with you once a month. And if I need to meet more, then I will. But I also, I protect other things where like on the weekends, I'm not typically working. I'm off by this time. When I'm home, I'm home. I try and put some specific things in place, but at the end of the day, what's most important than being some sort of, high producer in the marketplace is, do I have the capacity for
Hmm.
my family still, for myself, for my children? What are some things that you can, maybe some tips and tricks on how to
Yeah.
balance those things and create space to refuel?
Okay. Well, first off, you had said that I could share a little bit about what we've talked about in our
Sure.
personal sessions. And so I think that you have done a really good job, Stephen, at scheduling out a lot of your life, right? This is what happens on this day. This is what happens on this day. And I think that you can take that same skill, if you want to call it a skill, we can here, and apply that to our personal life within our family, right? We need to schedule if we are abusing it or if we're not having enough time within our day to spend with ourselves, with our significant other, or with our children. We don't have time not to spend with them. I think it's a good way you could say that. And so if your schedule is overloaded, we have to really then look back at how what are your priorities? What comes first within your priorities? What is really taking from you the most, that is not allowing you to engage within the self-care, right? And so if there is something, we just have to start cutting things out, or moving them over to other days, and then whenever your schedule becomes full, this is where the boundaries can come into place. Your schedule is full, you don't take on anymore, right? And you schedule. I think that you even said, one of our sessions, that you had to schedule in just kind of like family time, picking up your daughter, holding your daughter, really being intentional with her. And so we schedule everything else in our life. So why not add on self-care? Again, if we don't do this, we have to ask, who are we really hurting at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think for myself, I put a lot of things into a day, and I have to be very intentional. And for me to really be present, to
Hmm.
really get the most out of those moments when I'm with my family, if I
Hmm.
don't block out the time, then my mind might be on some other things. If I
Hmm.
don't actually, and to me, that's one of those mental boundaries I was talking about earlier. It's
Hmm.
from here to here, I'm working on this. From here to here, I might be connecting with this person. And when I know, as soon as as soon as that time hits, I can shut off what I was doing and move and compartmentalize it a little bit and move right into that next thing. I've set a
Yeah.
mental boundary there so that I can be fully present in this one thing. And it's just, I want to put my money where my mouth is. I
Yeah.
want to walk the walk and not just talk about it. So I have to be, for me to be intentional, I don't naturally take care of myself. I naturally look at a mountaintop and just start going until I get there,
Mm.
kind of like a bulldozer, you know.
Right.
So I have to, in order to be more gentle or, actually valuable to those around
Hmm.
me, I have to write in things to be more intentional, right? People set
Hmm.
reminders on their phones because they do things to drink water and things like that. The most important things to me obviously are my family, my relationships. But the thing is, I get moving in a lane, and I'm thankful that I have the ability to move fast and get a lot done. But if I'm not very intentional about those other things, blocking those out, setting reminders on my phone to actually not just pick up my daughter and hold her, but to
Hmm.
enjoy
Sure.
in
Yeah.
that moment and not thinking about other things. And it's not easy, and I have not figured it out perfectly.
Yeah.
Um, but I also have an amazing wife who's just super great at communicating if there's we've made a distinction between disconnection and distance. They're kind of two different things. Distance means we're kind of moving too fast in two different directions. And a disconnection means hey, I didn't like how you said that. There's a little break here in the disconnection. If you get too much distance, it puts a strain on the relationship and can cause disconnection.
Absolutely.
But before it gets to that disconnection level, and when we start to feel that strain, there's a precedent that's set that we have to say something. Like if she's feeling distant, if I'm feeling distant, we say a thing. And while we have scheduled dates, I mean, we have 2 kids, we have a puppy, we've got multiple businesses, we're moving in. She's a stay-at-home mom, which is every bit as difficult as what I do.
Yes.
And you have to create those checks and those stops and those reminders and those intentional, organized things to prop up those organic, beautiful moments.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with you there. I mean, and just so your listeners know, you and your wife, I don't want to assume, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but you guys did not enter into marriage automatically communicating at the level that you guys communicate at right now. Like, it was something that probably was very painstaking, and a very lengthy process to get to the level that you're at now.
To be perfectly honest, we've been married, it'll be 15 years this coming year. And to be perfectly honest, I would say the first 12 years did not have very good communication. And neither one of us knew how to practice self-care. Neither one of us knew how to really communicate where we were at. And I'll just be 100% honest. It was a particular book that kind of opened my eyes to the way things are. It's called Keep Your Love On by Danny Silk. And it started giving me new language to be a little bit more relational, to understand where I'm at. And it honestly just kind of changed my entire paradigm on taking care of myself in relationships around me, how to communicate, how to set boundaries, how to give life and not just, it was incredible.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to just kind of the last tip here that I wanted to offer is I think that as individuals are living in the 21st century and we are living in an electronic world, per se, we have become so ingrained that whenever we are off work, the electronics come on. And that might not be for everybody, but that is seen across many different professions, right? The construction, the higher up, even the counseling, right? It's a way to decompress. And so I think that within self-care, we have to be careful of not scrolling on a social media app for an hour whenever our family really needs us. And so I wanted to say that we almost have to parent our phones as much as we have to sometimes parent our children. We have to put our phones away. We have to put the electronics away and really be present, because this is another good question to ask yourself. What is really stealing from our time that we have set aside to practice self-care? Or could we have enough time within our schedule if we just put our phones down, put something else down, and be more intentional with the time that we're given?
Yeah, I'm sure you see this a lot. And I've seen it in some other friends of mine too, where they've, because of technology, rather than, yes, it steals our time, but it makes us a little bit less intentional around us as well, like with our relationships around us. And we've almost developed this like escape mentality. So it's like self-care, and just to differentiate here, like to some people it might be reading a book, to some people it might be pulling away and just going for a walk or something like that. But escaping is not the same thing as self-care. And self-care is an actual like intentional action that you are doing to refuel and to recharge in some way, versus just escaping into Facebook or social media or YouTube or whatever. Just even sometimes, I agree that some people can, do what you call real therapy and stuff like that. But I know for myself that can just as easily be an escape.
Yeah.
And just a mind, my mind has been going so much all day, and I just need something mindless to
Right.
kind of numb the rawness of what's been going on all day long, because it sometimes I don't necessarily take care of my capacities in the right way. When I come home, my kids are screaming and yelling and stuff. I'm just like, "No, I'm going upstairs. Sorry." And that can create a disconnection between me and my wife, because she also has been dealing with that all day long. And she needs a break, and I'm not helping her take care of herself. And it's just I can just, that probably happens a lot, just to be perfectly honest.
It happens way more than we would like to admit, right? It's seen within my office a lot more than we like to admit. Yeah, and it's really just, it's got to stop with the one-upping, right? And I know that you're definitely not trying to do that, but I think we as a society are all trying to do that in some way, somehow. Well, I've been at work 8 hours. Well, and then the woman that's taking care of the kids, or the man that's saying, well, so have I, like, this isn't easy.
Yeah.
So really, that
Well,
kind of boils.
It's happening.
Would
Okay.
you say?
I'm not
Yeah.
above
No, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but we really just need to check ourselves whenever it does. Like, hey, I'm tired, but so are they. Or I want to practice my self-care, but so do they.
Yeah.
And why does my tiredness, why does my exhaustion get to outweigh theirs, get to negate theirs? And so we really just, again, that comes back to priorities, communication, boundaries, all of the above. And really not just saying, kind of like you said, you want your words to be followed up with action. You want to walk the walk, essentially. And so you kind of lost my train of thought here. You have to not only say you're going to do it, you have to see action from it. And if you're not seeing action, ask a buddy. Hey, this is what I'm wanting to do. I need you to call me out if you're not seeing it within the next month. I need you to call it out within me so that I can do better. Talk about it with your spouse, with your friends, with your relatives, something like that. Like, that accountability there needs to be there.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to be respectful of your time. I know we barely scratched the surface here on how deep this really can go, and I hope we can give you guys just some ideas. Maybe we'll put some resources out there as well, with some more little tips and tricks on what you can do to dive more into this subject. I really appreciate you coming on here, Luke.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, I highly suggest that people would, go and seek out professional counseling. It's not just for people with problems. It's not just for me. From the very start, it's been preventative. There's been times in my life when I really needed a counselor,
Sure.
but by the time I truly valued it, it was mostly preventative or just maintenance, part of my self-care routine. So I highly suggest that you guys go out and seek some sort of professional counseling, someone who's actually trained, who Luke has education in speaking the language that we're talking about. I realized that I didn't speak the language as well as I wanted to. So I sought out the help that I needed. And I think that everyone could benefit from that. So not to put you on the spot, just one last thing.
Yeah.
We always try and give somebody some sort of actionable challenge. So what would you say, just to wrap up and to kind of give us an actionable challenge that we can move on?
Yeah, that's a good question, Stephen. I think that what I want to leave you guys with is asking yourself, is your self-care actually self-care, or is it just you surviving? And what I mean by that is, are you chucking up all these 5-minute little naps that you take throughout the day, or 5 minute increments of you scrolling on your phone up to self-care? Some days that's what it has to be, because that truly is all the time that you get or all the time that you have. But I really want you and your listeners to be intentional with self-care, right? To really start thinking, how am I best refueled? Is what I am calling self-care actually self-care? Is it refueling me, making me a better person at the end of the day? Or is it just me surviving and calling it self-care? Kind of putting quotation marks around it and being like, yeah, that was my self-care. That's what I want to leave you guys with, because I think that as soon as you guys start to take care of yourself, you're able to start taking care of your families, your friends, and your relatives. You're able to begin to touch the bottom of their empty tanks and fill into them. Whenever you're able to fill into them because you're healthy, they will begin to be able to fill into you because they are healthy as well.
Man, that's really good. Thank you, Luke. I really appreciate you coming
Yeah,
on here.
man.
I'll see you next month.
All right. See you, man. Take care.
Thanks, guys.